Listen, I need to show you something that's happening right now with retirement accounts that almost nobody is talking about. And if you've got money in a 401k, this affects you directly. Here's what I'm seeing. The 401k contribution limit just jumped to $24,500 for next year. Sounds good, right? More room to save. But here's what they're not telling you. While they're raising the amount you can put in, they're doing absolutely nothing about what's happening to the value of what's already sitting in there. Think about it. You've been contributing for years, maybe decades. You've watched that number grow. You feel good about it. But that number? It's denominated in dollars. And those dollars are losing purchasing power faster than most people realize. I want you to understand something fundamental about how 401ks actually work. When you contribute, you're buying shares of mutual funds, index funds, maybe some bonds, all priced in dollars. Your statement shows a dollar amount. But what really matters isn't the number on the screen. It's what that number can actually buy when you need it. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine someone who retired in the year 2000 with $1 million in their 401k. Sounds like a lot, right? That $1 million could buy a nice house, a couple of cars, fund a comfortable retirement. Now fast forward. That same $1 million today, it buys significantly less. The house costs more. The cars cost more. Healthcare costs have exploded. Groceries, energy, everything. But here's where it gets really interesting. We're not just talking about normal inflation anymore. Something different is happening in the financial system right now, and it's accelerating. You've probably noticed it. Your grocery bill keeps climbing, your insurance premiums keep going up, gas prices swing wildly but never seem to come back down to where they were. That's not random. That's monetary debasement. That's what happens when the currency itself loses value. Now, the Federal Reserve will tell you inflation is under control. They'll point to their preferred metrics. But those metrics don't include food and energy, the things you actually buy every day. They use something called core inflation, which conveniently strips out the stuff that's going up the fastest. Here's what's really happening behind the scenes. The national debt just crossed $36 trillion. That's trillion with a T, and it's growing by about $1 trillion every 100 days. Think about that pace. Every single day, the government is adding billions to the debt pile. How do they service that debt? They have two choices. They can raise taxes, which is politically unpopular, or they can print more money, which is politically invisible but economically devastating. Guess which one they choose? When they print money, it doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It dilutes the value of every dollar already in existence, including the dollars in your 401k. Your account balance might stay the same, or even grow, but its purchasing power erodes. Now let me show you something that most financial advisors won't tell you. The traditional 60-40 portfolio, 60% stocks and 40% bonds, that's been the standard advice for decades. But that model was built for a different era. It was built when bonds actually provided protection, when interest rates were stable or falling, when inflation was genuinely under control. We're not in that world anymore. Bond yields have been manipulated for years through quantitative easing. Stock valuations are at historic highs by almost every metric. Price-to-earnings ratios, price-to-sales, market cap to GDP, all flashing warning signs. And here's the thing about 401ks. You're locked in. You can't just pull your money out without penalties if you're under 59 and a half. You're forced to watch whatever happens happen. If there's a market correction, you write it down. If inflation spikes, you feel it in slow motion. I want to tell you about something that happened in the 1970s. Most people don't remember this period, or they weren't alive yet. But it's incredibly relevant to what's happening now. In the early 1970s, the United States went off the gold standard completely. Nixon closed the gold window in 1971. Suddenly, the dollar wasn't backed by anything except the government's promise. And what happened next? Inflation exploded, not gradually, explosively. People who had saved their whole lives in dollar-denominated assets watched their purchasing power evaporate. Retirees on fixed incomes got destroyed. The stock market went nowhere for a decade in nominal terms and got crushed in real terms when you account for inflation. But here's what's fascinating. During that same period, gold went from $35 an ounce to over $800 an ounce. It wasn't that gold became more valuable, it's that the dollar became less valuable and gold maintained its purchasing power. Now, I'm not saying we're in exactly the same situation, but the parallels are striking. We've got massive government debt. We've got a central bank that's proven it will print unlimited amounts of money when there's a crisis. We've got geopolitical tensions rising. We've got de-dollarization happening globally as countries move away from dollar reserves. China and Russia are settling trade in their own currencies. The BRICS nations are talking about a gold-backed trade currency. Saudi Arabia is accepting yuan for oil. These aren't small developments. These are tectonic shifts in the global monetary system. And what does all of this mean for your 401k? It means the assumptions that portfolio is built on might not hold. The idea that stocks always go up over time? That's based on dollar debasement. The idea that bonds provide safety? That's based on stable interest rates and low inflation. The idea that diversification protects you? That's based on assets not being correlated. But when the currency itself is the problem, traditional diversification doesn't work the same way. Everything priced in dollars moves together when the dollar is losing value. Now here's where this gets personal. If you've got $100,000 or more sitting in retirement accounts, you need to understand there are options most people don't know about. I'm talking about gold IRAs. This is a way to hold physical precious metals inside a retirement account, maintaining the tax advantages while getting out of pure dollar exposure. I put together a free guide that explains exactly how this works, the rules, the process, the pros and cons. It's in the description below. No obligation, just information. Because I think if you're sitting on 6 figures or more in retirement savings, you should at least understand what's possible. All right, back to what's happening in the markets right now. Central banks are buying gold at the fastest pace in decades. The World Gold Council just reported that central banks added over 1,000 tons of gold to their reserves last year. That's not a small amount. That's a massive accumulation. Why are central banks doing this? They're not stupid. They understand the monetary system better than anyone. They're diversifying away from dollars and into hard assets. They're preparing for a different monetary regime. But here's what's interesting. While central banks are buying, most individual investors are still 100% exposed to paper assets. Stocks, bonds, cash, all denominated in currencies that are being actively debased. Let me give you a specific example of how this plays out. Let's say you've got $500,000 in your 401k right now. Sounds like a solid nest egg. But let's think about what that actually represents. If inflation runs at the official rate of 3% per year, which many people think is understated, that $500,000 loses $15,000 of purchasing power in the first year. The second year, it loses another $14,550. It compounds. Over a decade, you've lost over $130,000 in real purchasing power, even if the nominal balance stays the same. But what if inflation runs hotter than 3%? What if we see periods of 5%, 7%, even 10% inflation like we saw recently? The erosion accelerates dramatically. Your retirement date doesn't change. Your expenses don't go down. But your purchasing power does. Now, I want to show you something about market cycles that most people miss. We tend to think of bull markets and bear markets in terms of price. The S&P goes up, we're in a bull market. It goes down, we're in a bear market. But there's another way to measure it. You can measure markets in terms of real value, not just nominal price. And when you do that, you see something fascinating. There have been long periods where the stock market went up in dollar terms but down in gold terms. Meaning, yes, your 401k balance grew, but it bought less gold, less real assets, less purchasing power. From 2000 to 2011, the S&P 500 went essentially nowhere in nominal terms, but in gold terms, it got destroyed. If you measured your wealth in ounces of gold instead of dollars, you lost massive value being in stocks during that period. Why does this matter? Because we might be entering another one of those periods, a period where nominal prices stay elevated or even rise, but real purchasing power declines. Where your 401k statement looks okay, but what it can actually buy keeps shrinking. This is the secret they don't want you to understand. The financial industry makes money on assets under management. They charge fees based on the dollar value of your account. They have no incentive to tell you that the measuring stick itself is broken. Think about how 401ks are marketed. They show you projections. If you contribute X amount per year and earn Y% return, you'll have Z dollars at retirement. But those projections never account for real inflation. They never show you what those Z dollars will actually buy. They assume you can withdraw 4% per year safely. But that 4% rule was developed in a different economic environment. It assumed certain inflation rates, certain market returns, certain bond yields. All of those assumptions are being challenged right now. Here's another thing most people don't realize. Your 401k is an unsecured creditor relationship with financial institutions. You don't actually own the stocks in your account. You own a beneficial interest in a pooled account. There are layers of intermediaries between you and the actual assets. In a normal environment, this doesn't matter. But in a crisis, in a situation where the financial system is under stress, those layers of intermediaries become counterparty risk. We saw this in 2008. We saw brokerage firms fail. We saw money market funds break the buck. We saw things that were supposed to be safe turn out not to be. Now, I'm not saying your 401k is going to disappear, but I am saying the risks are different than most people understand, and the protection strategies that worked in the past might not work going forward. Let me tell you about something that happened in Cyprus in 2013. The banks got in trouble. The government needed a bailout, but instead of just printing money or raising taxes, they did something different. They took money directly from bank accounts. They called it a bail-in. People woke up one morning and found that a percentage of their deposits had been converted to bank equity. Just gone. Poof. This wasn't in some third world country. This was in the European Union, in a developed nation with property rights and rule of law. Could something like that happen to retirement accounts? Most people would say, no way. But the legal framework exists. There have been academic papers discussing it. There have been trial balloons floated. In a severe enough crisis, with enough political pressure, things that seem impossible become possible. This is why diversification outside the traditional system matters. This is why having assets that you actually control, that aren't dependent on the financial system functioning perfectly, that aren't denominated in a currency being actively debased, this is why that matters. Gold and silver have been money for thousands of years, not because of tradition, not because of superstition, but because they have properties that make them uniquely suited to store value across time. They're scarce, they're durable, they're divisible, they're recognizable. They can't be printed or created out of thin air. When you hold physical gold, you're holding something that has maintained purchasing power through every monetary crisis in human history. Through wars, through depressions, through currency collapses, through regime changes, gold has survived and maintained value. Now, does that mean you should put everything into gold? No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that having some portion of your wealth outside the traditional financial system, outside pure dollar exposure, outside the control of institutions that might not have your best interests at heart, that's just prudent risk management. Think about it like insurance. You have homeowners insurance not because you expect your house to burn down, but because the consequences of it burning down without insurance are catastrophic. You have car insurance not because you plan to crash, but because the risk is real and the consequences are severe. Precious metals in a retirement account work the same way. They're insurance against monetary debasement, against financial system instability, against the erosion of purchasing power that happens slowly over time but compounds into massive losses. And here's the beautiful thing about a gold IRA. You get to maintain the tax advantages of a retirement account. You're not taking a distribution. You're not paying penalties. You're not triggering a taxable event. You're simply moving assets from one custodian to another, from paper assets to physical assets, while staying inside the retirement account structure. The process is actually simpler than most people think. You work with a custodian who specializes in precious metals IRAs. They handle the paperwork. They coordinate with your existing 401k provider. The metals get stored in an IRS-approved depository. You maintain control. You can check on them. You can sell them if you want, but they're outside the traditional financial system. Now let me address something I hear all the time. But gold doesn't pay dividends. It doesn't generate cash flow. It just sits there. That's true. Gold doesn't pay dividends. But here's what it does do. It maintains purchasing power. And in an environment where currencies are being debased, where real interest rates are negative, where the financial system is over-leveraged, maintaining purchasing power is actually a return. Think about it this way. If you're earning 5% in a savings account, but inflation is running at 7%, you're losing 2% per year in real terms. You're going backwards. The nominal number goes up, but your purchasing power goes down. Gold doesn't have that problem. It doesn't promise you a return, but it also doesn't lose value through monetary debasement. It's a different kind of asset with a different purpose. And here's something else people miss. Gold tends to move inversely to confidence in the financial system. When things are good, when people trust the currency, when markets are stable, gold underperforms. But when there's uncertainty, when there's crisis, when people lose faith in paper assets, gold outperforms dramatically. We saw this in 2008. While the stock market was crashing, while real estate was imploding, while banks were failing, gold held its value and then surged. We saw it again in 2020 during the COVID crisis. While everything else was in freefall, gold spiked to all-time highs. This is the insurance aspect. You're not holding gold to get rich. You're holding it to not get poor, to maintain what you've already built, to protect against the downside scenarios that could devastate a traditional portfolio. Now, let's talk about what's coming. Because I think we're at an inflection point. The policies that have been in place for the last 15 years, the zero interest rates, the quantitative easing, the massive government spending, all of that is reaching its limits. The debt can't keep growing at this pace forever. The currency can't keep being debased without consequences. The financial engineering that's held everything together is starting to crack. You're seeing it in the bond market. You're seeing it in currency volatility. You're seeing it in the fact that gold keeps hitting new all-time highs, even while stocks are also at highs. That's unusual. That's telling you something. It's telling you that smart money is hedging, that people who understand the system are preparing for a different environment, that the assumptions of the last 40 years might not hold for the next 40. And if you're in your 50s, your 60s, approaching retirement, or already there, you don't have time to recover from a major mistake. You don't have decades to wait for markets to come back. You need to protect what you've built. This is why I'm so passionate about getting this information out, because I see people who've done everything right. They've saved diligently. They've contributed to their 401k every paycheck. They've been responsible, and they're sitting on this ticking time bomb without realizing it. They think they're diversified because they own different mutual funds. But all those funds are denominated in dollars. All of them are exposed to the same systemic risks. All of them depend on the financial system continuing to function the way it has. What happens if it doesn't? What happens if we have another 2008, but worse? What happens if the currency crisis that's been building for years finally arrives? What happens if the debt spiral becomes unsustainable? These aren't crazy conspiracy theories. These are legitimate risks that serious economists and financial analysts are discussing. The Bank for International Settlements has warned about it. The IMF has warned about it. Even some Federal Reserve officials have expressed concern. But the mainstream financial advice hasn't changed. It's still the same 60-40 portfolio. It's still the same stay the course mentality. It's still the same assumption that what worked for the last 40 years will work for the next 40. I'm telling you, that assumption is dangerous. The world has changed. The monetary system has changed. The risks have changed. And your strategy needs to change with it. This doesn't mean panic. It doesn't mean selling everything and buying gold bars to bury in your backyard. It means being thoughtful, being strategic, understanding the risks you're actually taking and making informed decisions about how to protect yourself. For most people, that means having some portion of their retirement savings in assets that aren't correlated to the stock market, that aren't denominated in dollars, that aren't dependent on the financial system functioning perfectly. It means understanding that the number on your 401k statement is just that, a number. What matters is what that number can buy. What matters is the purchasing power it represents. What matters is whether it will be there when you need it, in real terms, not just nominal terms. This is the secret to protecting your 401k. It's not about picking better stocks. It's not about timing the market. It's not about finding the next hot investment. It's about understanding the nature of money itself, understanding the risks in the system, and positioning yourself accordingly. The financial industry doesn't want you to know this because it threatens their business model. The government doesn't want you to know this because it reveals the consequences of their policies. But you deserve to know. You deserve to understand what's really happening with your money. So here's what I want you to do. Take a hard look at your retirement accounts. Understand what you actually own. Understand the risks you're taking. And then make an informed decision about whether you're comfortable with that level of exposure. If you've got significant assets in traditional retirement accounts, at least educate yourself about the alternatives. Understand how gold IRAs work. Understand the process. Understand the costs and benefits. You might decide it's not right for you, and that's fine. But make that decision from a place of knowledge, not ignorance. The guide I mentioned earlier, it's completely free. No strings attached. It explains the whole process, the rules, the considerations. It's in the description. Check it out if this resonates with you. Because at the end of the day, this is your retirement we're talking about. This is your financial security. This is what you've worked your whole life to build. And it deserves to be protected with the same care and attention you put into building it in the first place. The secret isn't complicated. It's just about understanding reality. Understanding that the dollar is not a stable measuring stick. Understanding that the financial system has risks. Understanding that diversification means more than just owning different stocks. It means owning different types of assets, including assets that exist outside the system entirely. That's the secret. That's what the wealthy have always known. That's why central banks hold gold. That's why sovereign wealth funds hold gold. That's why the smart money is moving in this direction. And now you know it too. The question is, what are you going to do with this information? Are you going to ignore it and hope everything works out? Or are you going to take action to protect what you've built? The choice is yours, but make it an informed choice. Make it a conscious choice. Because doing nothing is also a choice. And in the current environment, it might be the riskiest choice of all.